Hey, welcome to Genre Cat Podcast for Serious Writer. I'm Caleb Walton, and tonight our guest is C.S. Lakin. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
I'm glad to have you. I actually took one of your classes at the Blue Ridge Conference on novel structure and just learned a lot that's helping me frame up my own novel and just really, really good insight into the craft. So I wanted to touch a little bit on that. Before we get started, I wanted to remind everyone to click the like button and subscribe to the Serious Writer YouTube channel. If you are watching from YouTube, you can also find us on seriouswriter.com/blog. But before we got started into talking about your experience with novel structure and the different things, tell a little bit more about what you're involved in and how you got started with writing.
Okay, well, let's see. We don't have 17 hours, so I'll just keep it really brief. I was raised by a mother who was a screenwriter, so I grew up reading scripts. Actually, my first job when I was like 10 years old was to collate her scripts, which, for people like you don't even know what that means. Back in the day,
No, I have no idea.
typewriters, and they didn't have copy machines and no
Mhm.
computers. This is, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, right? So my mom would take, pieces of like 4 pieces of paper because she had to make 4 copies of the scripts to mail off to New York, for instance. And she would put carbon paper between them. Those are these little sheets of paper that actually have a thing of carbon on them. And so when you type, it makes a copy onto the next page. But I know this is like really bizarre for you to conceive of. Your generation has probably never seen a sheet of carbon paper. But
Actually, I haven't used I've used some carbon paper with like tests and stuff in school, and I actually have a typewriter. So I have a.
wow. Okay,
It's
so
not a
you
completely
might know what
foreign
I'm talking
concept. I
about.
mean, I've seen it in books, heard about, heard about
Okay,
it.
so anyway, my job after she wrote her 30-page script for the doctors, she wrote for the serials, like TV serials, like soap operas.
Mhm.
My first job was to take, the stack and then take all the carbon papers out and then make the 4 copies and make sure to just collate everything into copies so she could clip them and send them off. So yeah, so I grew up reading screenplays, and so I have a real strong cinematic
Mhm.
view of how to write story structure. I think I probably read as many scripts as I read books growing up. So there's
Wow.
stacks. My mom was a story editor for a lot of years. She was the first female story editor for Mod Squad she was on. So she would bring home all these stacks of scripts and she'd go through them, and I'd love to read them. So a lot of my influence in terms of writing had to do with being in a household with a writer mother who wrote for a living, basically. And then my brother also became a producer, writer for TV. So I didn't really want to get into writing screenplays, although I did help on projects for development for TV series and things like that. But but I've always been writing all my life. So writing poetry, writing, little short stories. I was a big short story fan, big Ray Bradbury fan. So I always wanted to
Mhm.
write weird sci-fi stories, mostly sci-fi stuff. So yeah, it wasn't until I was about 30 when I wrote my first novel, and I got an agent right away. And he didn't sell my book, but it kind of got me started in that journey of, wanting to become a famous novelist. I didn't know it was going to take me 23 years to get published to that point. And that was really a very discouraging and difficult journey. And then this was all before self-publishing. So back in the day, you just would make copies of,
Mhm.
spend a lot of money at the printers to make copies of your chapters and mail them off with a self-addressed stamped envelope so they could send stuff back to you. You spend hundreds of dollars on postage. It was a really hard time. So it wasn't until 2009 that I actually sold my first manuscript to a publisher. So yeah, big long journey.
And now you're actually writing not only novels, but also books on writing and on the craft of writing and novel structure and plotting and things like that. What got you interested in sort of shifting? I know you still write novels, but shifting into some nonfiction for writers.
I think it's because I became an editor. So I was looking for some sort of a writing or some sort of a career related to writing in the meantime, while I was waiting to become the next famous best-selling author.
Mhm.
So I took some courses and talked to people who were doing copy editing, and I realized that's something that I would be really good at and love to do because I was really into English comp in school. I was one of those neurotic people that love to have perfect sentences and put the
Mhm.
commas in the right place and stuff like that. So I got into editing as a career, and the more I edited people's manuscripts, the more I saw how bad they were. How badly structured they were. So much of the time people would pay me thousands of dollars to edit a manuscript, like fix all their punctuation and tighten the writing. And the story structure for their novel was terrible. I mean, they would just like have 50 pages of backstory and there was nothing happening.
Mm.
And I kept thinking, I'm
And that just makes you cringe, like the 50 pages of backstory. That just
yeah,
because
all of a
yeah,
sudden
it's
you had a frisson of shock go through your body. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. It's one of the first things I tell you.
Yeah, but I mean, so many writers really don't know what they're doing, and they don't even know there's such a thing as novel structure. I didn't really understand that. A lot of people know, as I mentioned in my course too, that a lot of people understand story structure intuitively because we've
Mm-hmm.
read a lot of stories growing up, we've read fairy tales growing up, so we kind of know how a story starts with some kind of incident that occurs, and then things build to a big climax at the end, and then everything gets resolved,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's the basic story structure that people are familiar with. But I found it difficult to take people's large sums of money and fix their editing when their story structure was really bad. So a number of years
Mm-hmm.
back, I decided to start encouraging writers to not get an edit, not get editing done. And
Mm-hmm.
I put together my critique site, which is critiquemymanuscript.com, and trying to educate writers about critiquing so that they would understand the need for getting their story structure straight first. So that's where I
Mm-hmm.
came from. At that point, I had already written about 10 novels, and I've written in a number of different genres. So I had a good sense of general story structure. And then I did a whole bunch of my own research because there are a lot of books out there on story structure.
Mm-hmm.
Some great books that I would recommend. James Scott Bell's Plot and Structure was the first one for me that got me thinking about basic story structure. Michael Haig, who's a screenwriting consultant, he has a book called Writing Screenplays That Sell, but it's a fantastic book for novelists that really talk about story structure. So I highly recommend that. Larry Brooks has Story Engineering, which is great. So there's a lot of books out there. Martha Alderson's The Plot Whisperer. Almost all of them basically teach the same traditional expected
Mm-hmm.
story structure. And that story structure works across just about every genre. Maybe not for something like literary fiction that's really out there, or for space opera, or for biography, or for family saga. I mean, once you start getting into kind of a different type of a story structure, like a family saga that's going to cover 50
Mm-hmm.
years is not going to have your typical protagonist, on a short-term goal that resolves in a climax, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
so this is what got me going into the critique thing, which is very different from a developmental edit, because people ask me, well, do you do developmental editing? But that really is massive reconstruction of your writing. And it still
Mm-hmm.
doesn't address the story structure. I might tear your sentences apart and your paragraphs apart and move things around, or say you need a little more description or whatever, but that's really not going to be the same thing as a critique, which is going to look at your whole overall plot and structure for your story. So
That's really good. And a lot of that is sort of a misconception. I think that you either have to be completely a plotting, outlining, structured writer, or you have to be an organic writer and not know anything that's going to happen. When really, I think probably the best is going to be a blend of the two, some structure in mind. I know you had the analogy that you gave in the class about the jar full of the rocks and the sand building up.
right. So as far as story structure goes, yeah, I always like to do my plotting in layers. I always
Mm-hmm.
generate a lot of ideas, and I'll put them on index cards. I might have like 50 index cards that have all my scene ideas, like, oh, this would be a great scene, but I don't know where it's going to go in the story, right? So if you understand the basic scene
Mm-hmm.
structure, the key structure that you need to follow, then you can start with those, like the big rocks. Like you have 10 key scenes,
Mm-hmm.
10 big rocks, and then from there you would add in your scenes that would fill in those spots, and build from there. So I just like to make things very simple for writers so that they can understand how to just start with a concept and move into laying everything out in a logical way.
Mm-hmm. And it's a good thing to have that, because a lot of I know I'm not very technically minded at all, so things like forming your own structure, it just turns out to be a mess. So it's good.
Yeah.
I know you have a
So,
background in construction and different things where you have to have that technical mind, and it's good to have that being applied to such a to the creative field.
yeah, I was going to say that I always tried to write really creative novels. I wanted to be really different. I was trying to break out. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to win a Pulitzer. So I thought if I would just break out of traditional structure and do things really weird and different, that would be attractive. And then I realized years later that it really doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
That the more you break away from traditional structure, the more confused your readers get and the more unhappy they are, because you're not doing the things at the point in the story that they're expecting. They're expecting something to happen at the beginning, an inciting incident that kicks things off. So if you have 50 to 100 pages of your character just going through daily life and going to work and brushing her teeth and dealing with the dog and whatever, and there's really nothing happening, then readers start getting really restless and frustrated because they're like, they've expected that incident to occur, because that's traditional story.
That's what we've been trained to do. What are some other things? What are some of the, and I know that you had 10 different scenes and they're all laid out, and I know your courses and the different books and stuff you've written, but just to give a quick idea, that what are some typical story structure things that people subconsciously expect that we need to incorporate?
Okay, hold on one second. So does that mean, what time do I have to leave here? I'm recording a podcast right now, and no, but I'm a member here at the club.
I'm just not supposed to leave anyone, and I have a meeting.
Sorry about that.
No, you're fine.
Can I just lock this door behind me when I leave the room?
That's not important. We're just supposed to leave by the end.
I just need 15 more minutes, right? Is that what we're doing?
Correct. Yeah, it'll just be about maybe 10, 15 more minutes.
Thank you. All right. Thanks. Sorry. I hope you can edit that out there.
No problem.
The senior center lady just gave me a note saying it's closing now. I need to leave. Okay. All right. So she'll give me 15 more minutes. That's good.
No
Okay.
I'm always paranoid. I always have a sticky note on my office door saying "recording, please do not disturb" whenever I'm in here, because I usually record at my office because the internet is stronger, and I get to use my headset and stuff. So I'm always scared somebody's going to walk in and interrupt.
Exactly. Well, I'm going to rent an office space, share space, not too far from here, where you can pay monthly and then pay by the hour to use cubicles and office space. And
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so but I haven't gotten there yet. So anyway, okay, so let me give a second here and then I'll answer your question. Okay, so for the 10 key scenes, there's not a rule that there's 10 key scenes. I basically came up with that. But if you look at the way most instructors teach, it comes out to about 10 key scenes, 9 to 10 key scenes. So I added the setup scene, which is the first scene or one of the first scenes in your story that sets up your world and sets up your characters and your characters' need, your protagonist's motivation, what her situation is like in life. And so from there, after that, you would have the inciting incident, which comes at around the 10% mark or before that. That right at the midpoint, there's a very key midpoint scene that has to occur, which makes your character go all in. It's a super recommitment moment or scene for your character. Other scenes that are really common are that dark night of the soul moment, which comes right before the big climax. And then after the climax is the resolution, which is the short sort of wrap up at the end. And then there's also some different twists and pinch points. And those are the other scenes that I fill in between the two.
Now, what's the difference between a twist and a pinch point?
Okay, so a pinch point is all about showing the power of the opposition, whether it's you're opposed to yourself, you're your worst enemy, or whether it's an outside opposition. It could be a storm, it could be a bear that's chasing you, whatever your main opposition is. I was just thinking of that movie, The Edge, which is where these guys crash in Alaska, and the whole movie is away from this bear that's trying to kill them and eat them. So there's always some sort of opposition. So pinch points are about introducing the opposition, and then the later pinch point that comes before the dark night moment is where the opposition really shows its full force and comes.
Okay. So it kind of coincides with that dark night moment, showing, because the stronger the antagonist is, be that your own self or the weather, setting, person, character, that much stronger your protagonist has to be. So I guess it's showing that balance.
That could barrel your protagonist into a dark night of the soul moment, because everything can start looking hopeless at that point. So so those are basically what pinch points are about. And then twists can be any number of things, but a twist is basically just something that twists the story in an unexpected way. So it could be a reversal, it could be a false hope that happens that turns out to be disappointing. So it could be big, it could be large, but when we read novels and we break them down, you can always see what those twists are. Any great novel is going to have lots of great twists. In the 10 key scene chart, I just used 2 twists as key scenes, but you can have 50 twists. Every little corner can be a twist and make it just, if you think of like a action adventure, kind of like a Ludlum type story, where the bad guys is chasing the good guy who's chasing the bad guys, and there's always like some unexpected thing that happens, and now they have to change course. That's what it is. Anything that makes your character change course, either.
And that's a good definition. I was actually telling my girlfriend's also a writer, and we were talking about how to give your story twists and unexpected turns without intentionally deceiving the reader, because you never want to intentionally mislead the reader just to pull the rug out from under them, but you also want to have unexpected things happen that do surprise them.
Right. I feel that the best, most amazing stories that end up being bestsellers for years and lasting stories of any genre are the ones that have a really great twist in the premise itself. You know, we love movies like Sixth Sense and other stories that have a big twist that's a big surprise at the key moment, you know, before the climax. Murder mysteries tend to be wrapped up in a twist all in their premise. You know, so like if you have a murder mystery and it's about a girl that's on the run because there's been somebody all her life that's been chasing her, you know, the big twist is going to be who that person is. It turns out to be people that she never met, right? So, but she, you know, but her dad was afraid that he was coming after his daughter. So, you know, something like that. So, you know, when you're depending on your genre, you're going to have twists at different degrees, you know, different amounts, but great stories have really a great twist to them.
That's good. That's good. And I know you also talked a lot about the climax and how the whole story builds toward the climax. And there's a difference that I've heard between action rising and tension rising as you approach the end of the story. And I know you talked about a lot of how you set up. I know you're talking about your own the current work in progress you're working on now. I think it's a thriller or a murder mystery.
Thriller, yeah.
Building up to the scene. What are some different ways that you can sort of set up those types of twists toward the end without giving away too much at the beginning?
Oh, well, that's an interesting question. Well, like for the story that I'm working on now, my Lightning Man story, it's based all on this huge twist or reveal or secret or whatever that I'm going to have at the climax. But, you know, I also, you know, would like to lay out all the different plot developments that happen in my story. So I'll make a list of everything that happens in my story. For instance, you know, the bad guys enter the park and they abandon their car and then they steal somebody else's car. And then they go off and park at a trail and they start hiking up to this lookout. You know, so I have all these different lists of actions. So what I always do is take a look at my list of actions and try to figure out how I could twist as many of them as I can. In other words, to misdirect the reader and then to set hints along the way. So for instance, I decided, okay, I need my guys to come into the park and they're going to abandon their van. And then they're going to go grab another car, steal another car. And I thought, okay, well, what's the obvious reason? Well, the obvious reason is that somebody has spotted their car because there's a blowout on their car because their terrorists blown up, you know, set off bombs in Seattle. And now they're in Mount Rainier Park. So I thought, okay, the obvious assumption is that they got in a situation where they needed to abandon the van and steal another vehicle. So the obvious twist for me was, what if that wasn't the case? What if they deliberately abandoned the van because they wanted it to be found? What if they planted things in the van or left things in the van in order to give an impression of what they wanted? They want to make it look like they're going to blow up Seattle, so they have all these bomb-making things in the car, but actually that isn't their plan. Maybe their plan is they just want to, you know, go out in glory with, you know, at the top of the mountain just because there are a bunch of old guys, you know, war vets that are angry and they're dying of, they're all dying. My characters are interesting. Yeah. So so the idea was to just sort of twist it, like take what's obvious, make a list of all the things that are presumed. What is your reader going to presume if they see this happen? And then think, how can I twist that to make it completely different from what my reader might presume? Now that really is helpful to do that in a thriller. You might not need to do it if you're writing a sci-fi or a romance or something. You know, in your sci-fi book, it might be all about trying to find, you know, tech or trying to, you know, come up with a, you know, build or create some kind of device or something. So the setbacks and the twists can be sabotage or you know, getting wrong information that you're promised is going to work and then turns out that it doesn't work or something like that. So you can just take every little element and think, well, what can I do to make it completely different than what the reader thinks it's going to be? And also what my characters think. I mean, the whole thing about the twist is it confuses your character too. like your character thinks, oh, I've got the cure to this disease, because obviously this disease, this antidote has cured all these people, but it turns out that somebody switched the chemicals or poisoned the chemicals or whatever. I'm watching Elementary right now. I'm on like episode the 23rd.
Oh, that's a great show.
I think I have like 122 more episodes to go through. But I love the Sherlock stuff mainly because it's all that problem solving stuff. And there's always clues. And the clues oftentimes appear to be leading to something, but they're completely twisted. They really go to another direction or misdirection.
Yeah.
So you can learn a lot from watching TV shows, take notes. Yeah, it's all fun. But
an interesting challenge I've run into talking about the balance between the twist at the end and the twist in the premise. I had one of my critique groups was analyzing the first couple of chapters, and she said, well, what's the answer to this? I want to know now. And I was like, well, that's something that's going to be revealed toward the later half of the story. She's like, I don't want to wait that long. And so, and that's something I've heard, especially even the reverse problem, like because I have a very big twist in the premise of my story that gets revealed toward the end of the first book. And I've also had, so it's a balance between giving the reader enough that keeps them going to find out the solution to all the conundrums that I've been presenting, and not making them wait too long to get that gratification. I've also seen the opposite happen also on TV shows, especially. There was one called The Blind Spot, I think it was. And it started out with this huge twist premise of a young lady waking up in a big duffel bag or a huge person-sized suitcase luggage in the middle of Times Square. And she wasn't wearing any clothes. She was tattooed from head to toe. And there was all these secrets coming out about how she got there, what her past was, links to different cults and different things that were going on. And it was really just the most amazing hook ever. But by the end of the first season, they had revealed all the questions. There was no reason to keep going.
And
they still tried to drag out season 2 and 3 and 4, and there was nothing else to watch for because they had revealed too much at the beginning. How do you like to kind of balance that and make sure there's enough to keep the reader going, but not enough to spoil it too quickly?
Well, and then TV shows and series are a whole different thing. Because sometimes they're just an episodic type of situation where there's no real big overarching story. That's why I love Fringe so much. I'm on a Fringe binge right now. I'm watching all the Fringe shows again. It's the best series ever made for TV, because in addition to all the individual episodes where all these crazy things are happening, kind of like it's Fringe of the FBI, like X-Files, there is an overarching story that goes over all the seasons, and it's just incredible the way it just starts revealing. So if you're writing a series, you do need to have a short-term goal reached at the climax, like your character reaches this one goal that they need to reach, and then it can find out that, oh my gosh, the bigger problem is still not solved, and it can just move right to the next book. So as far as all the little twists and turns that you're getting along the way, it's just a matter of just keeping your reader always on edge or off kilter, so that every time it looks like something is solved, there's like, you solve one problem, you create new questions, so there's always just, everything is still unsettled all the way until you get to the end. And then again, I've talked about how you could have a false climax too, where it looks like at the climax everything's resolved and your character could be completely wrong. And then you have a real climax that comes after that. So lots of different ways you can do it. But the best way to learn is just to study great books. I mean, if you're writing in a particular genre, if you're writing like a sci-fi thriller or something, then just get some bestsellers in that genre, read these sci-fi thrillers, deconstruct them, write out a summary of every single scene, and just take a look at how that all lays out. Identify where the pinch points are, identify where the twists are, how many twists do they have, what kind of twists. All that stuff is really super helpful. Of course, like you mentioned really earlier on about the writing too. So there's two parts to becoming a really great writer, is not just understanding the story structure and writing a great story, but you also need to become a really good writer, a good wordsmith. And again, if you study these novels in your genre, you're gonna learn the style, the voice, the pacing, the feel for that type of genre. There might be wide variety of writing styles, especially in fantasy, you get that. But I find that after a while, if you just start absorbing the writers that you really love, it starts affecting you, infecting you, and you start, yeah, too much sci-fi in my brain, really getting infected by these weird things. But it does impact your writing. It does influence your writing. And then it's just a matter of practicing your writing, get a critique, get some people to help teach you how to be a brutal self-editor so you can chop and cut and tighten your writing. Or maybe your writing might be real sketchy and you need to get deeper into your description. All of this is just a matter of practice and getting feedback from good critique partners, or a person like me, writing coach, that can look at your writing and say, okay, here's how I would tighten this up, and you're using too many of these types of words, or you're whatever. That's going to help a lot.
Awesome. Well, I really enjoyed speaking with you about all this and getting a lot more information. Really quick before we go, what's a good starting point for someone when they're trying to start that journey? They have the idea, they have the premise that they have in mind, maybe they've even worked a little bit on it to start structuring a novel better. What's a good starting point? I know you said there are certain pillars you have to put in place before others.
Yeah, I think I like to recommend two of my books. I don't mean to just be pushing my books. There's a lot of good books out there, as I mentioned. But the two books that really work hand in hand together is Layer Your Novel, which is all about what kind of scenes you need, where they go, what they are. And that's the basic structure for the novel. And the 12 Key Pillars of Novel Construction, which is really all about the elements that you need in your novel. So, you need to understand both. You need to understand where your scenes go, but you also need to understand, how do I make a compelling protagonist? How do I get a great story concept? How do I bring in theme into my story? What's conflict? What are high stakes? How do I develop those? So all of that is mentioned in my book in detail. I have a workbook for the 12 Key Pillars that has maybe 300 brainstorming questions and mind maps and all kinds of things that you can draw on to brainstorm all those ideas. So I think once you get all the cool ideas for your novel and you have all these cool scene ideas, then you just need to know how to put it all together. I like the index card method a lot. I just find that oftentimes when I'm working on a novel, I'll come up with a great idea for a scene, but it's just a random scene and I don't know where it's going to go. I just know, I want to have this moment with my character where they're talking to this person and then this happens, and I'll just jot it down on the index card and put it in my folder. So I'll have lots of folders for different book projects that I'm working on. I might not get to a book project for 2 years, but I'll have all kinds of notes and index cards in there and all kinds of stuff for scene ideas. But when I do finally sit down to work on that book, I've already got a whole bunch of ideas cooking. And that's when you start laying everything out on the table, or Scrivener, or whatever you use to organize your ideas, and start putting it in the right order. That's where Layer Your Novel comes in to help you get it in the right order.
That's awesome. And what are your websites again? I know you said you had several. One for your, your blog, your writer's blog, and then you've got your education website.
Okay, so for my blog, which I would highly recommend writers to go jump into, it's Live, Write, Thrive, write as in RWITE, livewritethrive.com. And I have over 1 million words of free instruction for novelists on that site that I've written over the last 7 years or so. So lots of free content there. I also, on my resource page, I have tons of charts. I talked about that at the conference. I'm a big chart person. So anytime I do anything, I think, I'll make a chart out of that. So I've got lots of charts that you can download, 10 key scenes, 20 key scenes, scene structure checklists, 8 steps to a perfect scene, a character development chart that you can work on to develop your characters. So lots of great resources there. So grab that at my blog. Also, if you sign up for my mailing list at my blog, you'll see on the right sidebar, there's a free ebook you get for strategic planning. Just click on that. And if you write novels, when you sign up for my mailing list, click on Join the Novel Writing Fast Track Group, because then you get all kinds of other information that helps you as a novelist. So, so that's my blog. My online course is, all my online courses, my video courses are at cslakin.teachable.com. And I do all kinds of editing and editing, proofreading, critiquing. As I mentioned before, I have a critique site called critiquemymanuscript.com, and that's basically to help people see what a critique is, what's involved, and of course you can upload your document and pay right there if you want to critique. So That's just a few of my websites. I also have writingforlifeworkshops.com, which is my boot camps. So if you're interested in going to a 3-day boot camp and start coming with an idea for your novel and leave with a finished outline in 3 days, that's what we do at Plotting Madness. It's really super fun. I hold them only in California, so you have to come out to California, sorry, in beautiful places, South Lake Tahoe, Mendocino, other beautiful spots. So, I mean, if you want me to come out to South Carolina sometime, just get enough writers together. Pay for my airfare. It's all good. I'll come out.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, I'm really glad you joined us. I really enjoyed speaking with you. I'll make sure to share the video and everything on your, on social media and everything. But I enjoyed speaking with you. And thank you guys for watching Genre Chat, and I will see you next time.
All right. Thanks.